Thank you Artlist for sponsoring this video. So how close can we actually get to the film look with a digital camera? Film emulation seems to be all the rage these days, especially with cameras like the Fuji X100 series that have a ton of different film emulation recipes that you can plug into your camera, and the camera spits out a JPEG that supposedly looks a lot like film. But I wanted to put this to the test, so I ventured out on the streets here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, armed with 3 cameras. My Konica Hexar RF shooting Portra 400 film, my Fuji X100 with the Portra 400 recipe from Fuji X Weekly, and my Sony a7 IV editing all the photos with my warm Portra preset, which is completely free. You guys can download that via the link in the description. I've been using this preset probably more than any other preset recently because I think it looks really good, but I wanted to know how close it could actually get to an actual Portra 400 shot. So let's head out on the streets and I'll show you guys some of the photos that I took. So first and foremost, shooting with 3 different cameras is totally not a vibe and I do not recommend it. But I did use 35mm lenses on all 3 of these cameras. So at least we have somewhat similar focal lengths. The Fuji felt a little bit more zoomed in, but generally speaking, all the photos have very similar or the same compositions. And taking a look at the first shot here, the photo on the left is the film shot. And honestly, I think it looks really, really good in this photo. It has a natural warmth in the highlights and the colors just look much deeper as well, especially the reds in the taillights. The contrast is a lot higher than the other 2 shots here, but I think it looks really, really good. Now, the Portra 400 recipe to me just feels a little bit meh, and I noticed this throughout a lot of the images. It has a green tint to it, and it kind of feels like there were colors that were just kind of slapped over the top of the image in a thin veil, and it just doesn't look like the colors that deep or that kind of ingrained into the image like you see with the film photo here. However, with a bit of adjustments, we can get it closer to that film look, but straight out of camera in this particular shot, I don't think that the Portra 400 recipe on the X100 series lines up with the film photo. And looking at the Sony shot edited with the warm Portra preset, I think it kind of splits the ground between the film shot and the Fuji shot. It's a little warm, but it looks really nice. And because of the fact that it's a raw photo, we can do a lot more adjustments to get it to look exactly like that film photo. So it might not look exactly like the shot right out of the gate, but with a few adjustments, you can get it pretty dang close. So check this out. Most people don't realize this about Chiang Mai, but it is full of amazingly beautiful, super cute cafes. And this one has been decorated to look like Japan. They took over the whole street. It's both sides. They have a little bench for waiting for the bus. They have a vending machine. They have soft serve, roti, 2 coffee shops, I think, and also this little train station here. It's so cute. They went all out with this. Kind of reminds me of Disneyland in a way. And they even have the little posters here on the side. So definitely a cool cafe to check out if you're in Chiang Mai. It's called Transit Number 8. Chiang Mai is full of places like this, and they're really fun to photograph. So let's take some pictures. So one thing that's good about having a digital camera is I can meter with this camera, so I don't have to worry about metering on the film camera, which is pretty nice. Now in this shot, once again, I think the film looks so good in this image. It's really maintained a lot of color detail in the brighter areas, and it has this natural kind of organic warmth to it. And in this shot, once again, the Fuji really fell short here. The shadows feel flat. There's a weird color tint over the image, and I just don't think it looks all that good. Now I did brighten it up a little bit in post and added a little bit of contrast, and I think it looks a lot better, but we're still missing out on that really beautiful color depth that we're getting in the highlights and in the shadows in this particular film photo. I think it looks amazing, and I really like that kind of reddish tint that we're seeing in Portra. And I think that's pretty common among Portra, that kind of warm reddish tint, which really adds a lot of color depth into the image. Now, I shot all these Fuji photos with the Portra 400 recipe V1. Now there is a V2, and I opened it up in Fuji X Studio and played around with it, and I do actually think it looks better than the V1. So if you are gonna be shooting with the X100 series and you're trying to get close to that Portra 400 look, I do think that the V2 looks a little bit better than the V1, and I'll show you guys some comparisons throughout the rest of this video as well. Now, looking at the Sony with the warm portrait preset, I think it looks a lot closer to that original film look than the JPEG recipe from the Fuji. And once again, I think that's because it's a raw file and we have a lot more control over that image. But when I was editing this image, in order for me to get that contrast in the foreground while still maintaining the colors and the detail in the sky, I did have to use selective adjustments to do that. Whereas with the film camera, it's straight out of camera and we have some really nice dynamic range, a lot of color depth, good contrast in the foreground, and we still have a pretty decent detail in the highlights as well. And that is a characteristic of film. Film tends to hold on to the highlights really well compared to digital. And in some of the images, you'll see that, but in other images, you'll see where the film actually fell short in terms of dynamic range as well. And you'll see that here pretty soon. Now in this particular shot, I think the Fuji and the Sony actually look better than the film photo. And a big reason for that is just the lack of dynamic range. It seems like the contrast is much higher and we're kind of losing out on some of the color depth that we're maintaining with those digital photos. But a big reason for this, I think, is because the lab that I sent the photos to didn't send me back perfectly flat scans. I'm not quite at the point where I'm scanning my own film. This is something I really want to do, but I don't think most people are doing that anyways. Most people are going to send their film to a lab, get it back, and take a look at those photos. So even though I did ask for flat scans from 2 different labs, I tried scanning my film at 2 separate labs. I just wasn't getting that dynamic range that I think I could have gotten if maybe I self-scanned the images or just went to a lab with a better scanner. The second lab that I took my film to told me that the first lab that developed my film actually used an over-concentrated solution. So it's possible you could get a lot more dynamic range out of your film that we're getting here. And you'll see this with other images that I shot that day as well. It just seems like we're losing out on a lot of detail in the shadows and in the highlights when we compare it to the digital photos, which just have a much higher dynamic range. But I still think the film looks really, really good, even when we do have that reduced dynamic range and that kind of a higher contrast look. Like in this photo, for example, I shot this at one of the temples here in the mountains in Chiang Mai, and the film shot has a lot higher contrast, but the colors just pop so much more than that of the digital files, especially in the reds and the oranges in the temple. I just think it looks so, so good, and it kind of has that natural warmth, that natural redness to it that looks so good with Portra 400. And I shot this one to take a closer look at the colors, and I really love the colors that are coming out of the film. The yellows, the reds, the oranges, the blues, the greens, everything just looks really nice and kind of full, if that makes sense. Whereas with the JPEG recipe on the Fuji X100 VI, it has that really weird bluish green tint. It doesn't look great. And I think once again, the Sony shot with the warm portrait preset kind of strikes that middle ground. It does look a little bit warmer, especially if you look into the shadowed areas of the image. It's definitely warmer than that actual film, but I think it looks good and it still kind of maintains that same vibe that you're getting from Portra 400. Now, one of the biggest differences you'll see between the film and the digital shots is sometimes those digital photos just look super digital and it's kind of hard to shape it into that film look. Sometimes it's going to look better, sometimes it's not going to look all that great. And in this particular photo, I think the film looks really nice. A lot of color depth, we're maintaining that detail, that color, even though it's a high contrast scene. Whereas with the Fuji, once again, it kind of has that veil of color thrown over the top and it looks super digital. And the Sony is kind of striking the middle ground there. Once again, I think it looks really good, but it does look pretty digital. And one of the things I've done in the past with my Fuji cameras is use a Pro Mist filter on the front. I used a 1/4 for a long time. I think that looked really good, but now I use a 1/8. But for some reason, I took it off of my camera before I shot these photos. But looking back at some of those other JPEG shots that I've shot in the past with the Pro Mist filter, I think the Pro Mist filter does look really good and it kind of softens out those highlights and makes them bloom a little bit more to give it more of that film vibe and a little bit less like a super digital file. But overall, even with some of these film shots where we did lose a lot of dynamic range, I still think that that film has just a really nice, organic, natural color to it, and it really maintains that color depth into the highlights. I think that's one of the things that film is known most for. Now, speaking of color, I wanted the clips in this video to somewhat match the photos that I was taking, so I graded all of them with the classic CineStyle LUT from Artlist, which is the sponsor of today's video. And Artlist makes this process incredibly easy with their powerful plugins feature that connects directly to your video editing software, whether you're editing in Final Cut Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro, or DaVinci Resolve. In Final Cut, all I had to do to grade these clips was download the powerful plugins feature from Artlist, open up the Effects tab, click on the Artlist color grading tab, and then drag and drop the classic CineStyle LUT over my footage, and then bam, it's good to go. And it's really easy to make minute changes to the grain or the tone or the color in the Effects tab as well. This is probably the LUT that I use the most because it's so easy to use and it works across all the different cameras that I shoot with. But plugins aside, Artlist also offers thousands of other royalty-free digital assets like high-quality music tracks, sound effects, stock footage, motion graphics templates, and their new AI voiceover feature, which uses professional voice actors to give you a super realistic sounding voice that you can use in your next short film, documentary, or YouTube video. And this feature is actually pretty insane. Check this out.
Along the California coast lies a peculiar beast. No, not that, this. He calls himself a photographer, yet look at his puny, pathetic little camera. He waits, stalking the coast for his next victim. A kind gentleman minding his own business, the side of a house, a random sign. Riveting work by this strange creature.
I mean, he's got a point. Now, I've been using Artlist for years, and it's one of the best investments that I've made in my creative business. And thankfully, Artlist has a wide range of subscription plans to meet you where you're at as a creator. So whether you're just starting out making videos or you're already working with a ton of clients, Artlist has a plan for you so you can get the most out of the platform. So if you want to check out the new AI voiceover feature, as well as the thousands of other royalty-free digital assets like high-quality music tracks, stock footage, sound effects, and plugins and templates, then head down to the first link in the description where you can get 2 months free. Thank you so much, Artlist, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it. Okay, so this brings us to the main question of this video. How close can we actually get to the film look with a digital camera? And I think the answer to that is we can get pretty damn close, but of course it's not going to be exact. And the simple reason for that is because they're completely different mediums. With film, you're burning chemicals onto paper, and with digital, it's a digital sensor. It's completely different technology, but I also don't think that you need to get the perfect exact one-to-one film look to capture the same vibe that you would be capturing in a film photo. And I think when the guys at Fuji X Weekly were creating this Portra 400 recipe, they weren't trying to mimic it 100%. They were just trying to mimic the same vibe to get the same feeling that you would get out of a photo that was shot on film. I've shot some of my favorite photos ever on the Fuji X100V and the Fuji X100VI, and even though they don't aesthetically match film on a one-to-one basis, they still have that timeless vibe to them, and I think that's the most important thing. And the same goes for my warm Portra preset as well. It's not going to be a one-to-one recreation of Portra 400, but it still kind of has that same timeless, warm film vibe that you get from shooting film. And that's the most important thing when you're editing a digital photo to look like film, is to capture the same emotions that you would get with a film photo. And I've been using this preset so much recently. I love it. Some of my favorite shots have been edited with this preset. And once again, you guys can download it via the link in the description. So does all of this mean that film is better than digital or digital is better than film? There seems to be so many videos online asking about which one is better, and I don't think you can see it that way. They're just different, and film is going to be better for some people and digital is going to be better for other people. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into shooting film that a digital shooter might see as a downside, right? It's difficult to shoot film. It's hard to travel with film. It's difficult to expose film. It's expensive to get it developed and scanned and to deal with that whole process. And it's also a lot slower of a process compared to digital, where you get to see your files right away. But for some photographers, those are all bonuses. They like to engage with it in a creative way. They like to wait to see their photos and delay that dopamine rush until the point where they get their scans back from the lab, where other photographers don't have time to deal with that. So it's really a subjective thing. I'm not gonna sit here and say that film is better than digital. They're just two completely different ways of taking photos, and that's why I love shooting both of them, and I will continue to do so. But I wanna know what you guys think about this video. Which images did you prefer? Did you prefer the film photos or the digital photos? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, don't forget to download my free preset pack, which has the warm Portra preset inside, and I really hope you guys enjoy that. Thank you so much, Artlist, for sponsoring this video, and I will see you guys again very soon.